Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me once again. My name's Alex, and this is That CNFT Show, episode 15. I'm sorry I had to take a week off. I know I really missed working on the show. I tried to hang out as much on Twitter and on Discord as I could during that week off, but I've had to make some adjustments in my life lately to working both more hours, longer hours. I'm helping a friend do some renovations, and it's both very physically and mentally taxing. So it was very, very difficult for me to muster up the energy and the concentration in order to be able to put on a show every evening, or even a couple times last week. But I've determined to work around my schedule a little bit more of that this week, which is why, thanks to my wonderful new ring light, welcome to That CNFT Show After Dark. So I hope you like it, and we have lots of stuff to talk about this week as usual. So what I'm going to do this week, and it may go into next week a little bit, I don't know whether this is going to be a 3 or a 4-part series, but I'm going to talk about calendar sites and how I go from looking at calendar listings to making decisions on how I evaluate a project, whether or not I want to check something out further, maybe even go so far as to purchase. But there's 3 categories that I sort of put NFT projects into as I'm looking at them at a first glance. Sort of a red light, yellow light, green light. And I'm going to be talking about those processes as we move through what I do to make my mints of the day tweet, which I try to put every day by about 1300 UTC or earlier if I can manage it, because most projects don't drop before 1300, and that's early. I'm in Eastern North America, so that's early for me. If I can get it out a couple of hours earlier, that helps. But basically, I wanted to take you through the process of how I go from a calendar listing to making some decisions about a project and whether or not I want to go forward, learn more, or whether there's just an immediate stay away, and that happens as well. So over the course of 3 or 4 episodes, what I intend to talk about are the calendar sites themselves, Twitter, which I consider a project's storefront, Discord, which is what happens when you go into the store, when you start exploring a little bit further. And then it's not always as important to me, but the way a project has set up their website as well. And it gives you some clues about what's going to happen, whether or not that drop is going to be successful, whether this project is going to build a big community, whether people are engaged. There's lots of things to consider, so we're going to talk about as many of those as possible in the next 3 or 4 episodes. So first, I wanted to talk about the calendar sites themselves. There's 6 that I check out every day, if not multiple times a day, depending on what's going on. And those sites are, let's see if I can remember them all: When CNFT, CNFT Calendar, Fresh Mints, CNFT World, CNFT Radar, and CNFT.social. So today, I'm going to go through a couple of points, maybe pros and cons of each site, things I like, things I think that they could improve on. And if there's any calendar sites or places that you go to see lists of drops, you can tell me about those too. So first off, we have When CNFT. So this is brought to you by 21 ADA Stake Pool. And this is, in my opinion, the most complete list of drops that are coming up, probably because, at least in my exposure to it, I've been using it the longest, and it's the first place that I think a lot of people go to, and it's the first place that projects list their drops. Now, one of the things I do really like about this site is that they have a very prominent disclaimer. I've talked about it on Twitter before, but it mentions how there's a good chance that at least one of the projects listed on the website is a potential scam. That's true of all of these sites. That's true of my own list that I put out every morning on Twitter. There are definitely some red flags that you can look out for between looking at a calendar listing and drop date. But any project can up and leave at any time. Even projects that look promising whether or not maybe they just don't get enough traction, maybe they aren't successful enough in their initial drop to pay for continued things that they wanted to build down the line. But there's really no way to know, either when you're looking at a calendar site, whether you're looking at Twitter, Discord, a website, whether you've even purchased the NFT on drop day, you don't know whether that project is going to make it. And again, we'll talk about some of the red flags leading up to that decision and how you can avoid potential pitfalls. But even the projects that you believe in, that you are engaged with, that you think are going to succeed, they might just not sometimes. So that brings us back to the point I've made several times on this channel, and lots of people have made on CNFT Twitter, is that you should buy projects that you would be happy owning, even if none of the stuff they promised ever comes to fruition, or if they don't promise anything at all and it's just art that you like and it's a thing you want to own. That's a really good way to look at it too. So again, that's When CNFT and their disclaimer about potential scams. One of the things that I do wish When CNFT did, which one of the other sites does, which we'll talk about, is under their listings, they have a link to go to that website's information or that project's information. And sometimes that can be to a website. Sometimes it's a Discord invite. Sometimes it's a Twitter page. Now, I would like to see this standardized, particularly because my personal sort of decision tree means I want to go check Twitter first. Like I said earlier, that's kind of the storefront of a project. If you see some red flags on the storefront, I usually don't go in to look around to see anything more about a project. And again, we'll talk about that more in the Twitter episode. But one of the things that I would like When CNFT as a calendar site to improve on is standardizing where that button takes you. However, that being said, one of the limitations of all these calendar sites is that projects are filling these out themselves. There are too many drops for anyone, myself, one of these calendar sites. There's lots more people who have started posting these sort of day-to-day lists of drops. There are too many happening to confirm each and every one within any, reasonable amount of time. And things change sometimes between when a project lists their drop on one of these sites and when drop day actually occurs. Some of them don't make it, some of them change, some of them are mislisted, some of the links don't work, some of the Discord invites expire. One of the big limitations of all of these aggregation calendar sites is that people have to submit their own information and things can go wrong with that process. So while it's not entirely the fault or the problem of any of these calendar sites, I would like to see some of these things standardized either across all these platforms as sort of a best practices, or standardized within the listings on your site themselves. So again, When CNFT is the first one that I check, and it's the most thorough. There's often the most projects here. One of the reasons why I do this site first is that after I've checked and completed my list of When CNFT, of what When CNFT has listed, I go and check the other sites, and there's often very few additions to my list that I have to add in later of sites that have projects listed on other sites, but not When CNFT. So that's why I start with that one first. The second one that I start with every morning is CNFT Calendar. And all these, I'm going to post links in the description below, and I'll post their Twitter handles on the screen as I'm going through them. One of the things I like about CNFT Calendar is the way that the calendar itself is organized. There's only 7 or 8 listings per page, and you can scroll through them by date. And they're very, very good at dropping off the ones that have already passed. That's a pet peeve of mine. Some of these websites continue to have lists up of projects that have either just recently dropped or in some cases dropped days or even weeks previously. And with the amount of information that's on the screen and the amount of drops that I'm trying to get through every day, when something is passed, I just don't want it there anymore. So again, that might be a best practice that if you're running one of these sites, I hope you take into account. The other thing that I really like about CNFT Calendar is they have a big Twitter button with a link to that project's Twitter page that's attached to every listing, and it's standardized. Again, after I've completed my list or I'm working on my list for these drops, one of the first places that I want to go is Twitter, and CNFT Calendar is really good for prominently and uniformly showing that Twitter link as part of the listing every day for every drop. So I really like that. So the third site that I check every day is CNFT World, and this is getting into being more of a supplement in terms of completeness on the most complete listings, probably because they haven't been around as long as some of the other sites. But what sets CNFT World apart are the creator interviews. In particular, Sean has covered projects like Voodoo Brigada. I learned a lot about that project from his interview with them, as well as Reva's World, which is one of the first places I heard about Reva's World was through their interview on CNFT World. So if you're looking for a way to get into kind of more behind the scenes about the genesis of a project or their plans for the future, the articles on CNFT World are a great place to go. The fourth site that I check is Fresh Mints, and its completeness in some ways is actually kind of a drawback. So Fresh Mints covers Cardano NFTs, covers Solana NFTs, and covers Algorand NFTs, and all three are listed. This is probably why they have the biggest amount of Twitter followers of any of these calendar sites at over 14,000. So they're plugged into several communities at once. And as passionate as we are about CNFTs, there's just as many fans over on the other side of the fence or in a couple of other different playgrounds. And Get Fresh Mints is a bridge between those, which I think is great. One feature that I would love to see is the ability to sort by blockchain, because when you just go to the regular page, drops from all three are listed. And I wish there was a way to either set a preference, sign in, or just sort a little bit more easily. There are sorting options, but it's not easy. And one of the things that I find about multi-chain sources of information are I barely have time to keep up with everything in CNFTs only. And I don't have anything against anyone making NFTs on other chains, but I can't spend time looking or being interested in anything more than a very, very passive and quick way. But Fresh Mints has also announced recently that there are a lot of changes coming up. And so maybe some of those ways to streamline your experience are coming. And I look very much forward to learning more about that as we get closer to them making those changes. The fifth site that I check is cnftradar.com. This is another multi-chain one. They, in addition to Solana and Algorand, they also have Ethereum drops on sort of 3 or 4 sister sites. And this is another one where right now it's supplementary for me. There are occasionally times where I will find a project listed on this site that I did not find on any of the ones with more thorough listings, but there's still gems that drop here that I haven't found anywhere else. So it's popular and it's growing in popularity, and I think more and more projects are catching on to wanting to list on all of these sites. The last one that I check right now is cnft.social. Now, I first came across this website, I'm going to say 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it was just a black screen with like 20 hyperlinks to different Twitter profiles, different other sites, and it was just a one-page aggregation of what then was a much smaller space. Now they've got a CNFT magazine with lots of interesting articles. They have a directory of projects that they have listed, and they have an upcoming drops list, again, where people can self list their projects coming up. So those are the 6 that I use. Like I said, a couple of pros and cons to each one, but I try to get through all of them every day because I don't want to miss something that has been listed on one of these and miss either finding out about it or misinforming my audience about what's coming out that day. That being said, some of the drawbacks to the calendar sites are none of them are going to capture everything. There's no way for them to fix it, but if the projects themselves don't get their act together and list their information accurately, I mean, it's the day we changed daylight savings time here in North America, which is a whole nother load of crazy. But now I know that I'm 5 hours away from the UTC time, and it seems that some projects either list it wrong, peg their website to a different time zone, or I've found some projects with multiple times on multiple listings across different calendar sites. So there are limitations to going to calendar sites first. Another example is there's some projects that either they are too small or just the right size where they don't want to list on a project calendar like this, or they've built up their own community of interested buyers and traders and consumers of their project, and they might not need to submit their information to a calendar site for every drop. But all in all, these are the first steps that I take when I go to look for new projects. And if a few things slip through the cracks, I don't feel too bad about it because there's too much for anyone to cover every day. So that's all I have to say about calendar sites for today. When I drop this episode on Twitter, if there are any other sites that you would like me to check out or that you use yourself, please post them in the comments to this YouTube video or on Twitter. I'm always looking for new tools to help me find new projects. And if there's some that I failed to talk about because I don't know about them yet, I'd really appreciate you sharing them with me. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. Again, I went a little bit longer, but I'm going to try to make this a 3 or 4 part series where I go from my calendar tweets all the way to how I make decisions about getting into projects or not. So thank you for joining me. Please enjoy this series for the rest of the week. And if you have any other questions, hit me up on Twitter. Projects you want me to talk about, drops that you're looking forward to, or just cool stuff that you're making or minting yourself, please send me a message. So that's all for tonight. I will see everyone on Twitter and in Discord later this week. Speaking of which, while you're here, go check out That CNFT Show Discord, hosted by Bicep Pool. And I hope to see you out there. Thank you very much for joining me. Talk to you next time.